Well, welcome back to the Studio Steele podcast, the show where we talk about biblical matters and issues and stuff like that.
And other things.
And amongst other things.
From what we heard last week, pretty resounding soft taco as opposed to hard taco, which I approve of all of you.
Yeah, good job,
all
everybody.
of you. Good job.
But now we have, we were talking about this before, another kind of like contentious issue.
Yeah.
That's come up in society recently.
Yeah, it's pretty deep, and I think you know where we're going with this.
Deep dish, actually.
Deep dish, yeah. So, when it comes to pizza, are you a pineapple person or are you not a pineapple person?
Adamantly opposed to pineapple.
Are you really?
I am.
Oh, I really like pineapple on pizza.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that, like, of what I know of you, and like all the ways that you do what you do, like, that doesn't surprise me, you know?
Yeah. Well, I grew up eating it. Like, that was like the pizza that my parents would get. We would have Hawaiian pizza and it was great.
Yeah.
I'm on team, like, I think a lot of people are just really quick to like push it aside. They're like, oh, this is it's a sweet thing. Sweet stuff like doesn't go on pizza.
Yeah.
But I think food is elevated when you add more flavor profiles.
Oh, okay.
Like, I mean, I like Thai food, Thai culture, all that kind of jazz.
You're
they're
so cultural.
Well, I mean, their big thing is like they have salty, sweet, sour. They kind of mix all of the profiles.
Oh, yeah.
So I think food's even better when you mix it. So I think that's one reason why I love pineapple on pizza.
Well, aren't you the connoisseur?
I'm glad you're finally realizing this.
Well, I look forward to you having ham and peaches on your next.
Which honestly could be good.
Well,
you have to change your like sauce of it. Like, I wouldn't want like a tomato sauce, but I think that could be good.
Okay, well, for everybody who's wrong out there, let us know if you like pineapples on your pizza, and maybe on a Friday night, maybe you want to put some peaches on your pizza with your ham, and give that a run at ruining your pizza too.
Hey, I'll happily join you on that adventure. I would love to try some peach and ham pizza.
Let us know if you try peach and ham pizza, and let us know if that works.
But more so, let us know if you are team pineapple on pizza or team not pineapple on pizza.
Yeah,
because I feel like you're either in one camp that no one's very much just like, it's okay. It's like you love it or you hate it.
There are feelings.
Yeah,
there are all the feels on either side that issue. So contentious, I know, but
let us know.
This is where we talk about the tough issues.
Yeah. So what else are we talking about today?
Well, today we're moving along in our D6 curriculum.
Yes.
And over the past couple lessons, we've looked at the story of Jacob.
Yep.
Right. And so the first story that we looked at was Jacob, with the help of his mother, deceiving the rest of his family. His technical older brother, although he is a twin, born one grasping the other.
Yeah, I was like, I got it.
So but Jacob, technically the youngest, steals his brother's birthright and blessing.
Yeah.
Like, very, very tricksy stuff that was happening there.
And it was all about food too. Like, if you read about it, it's like, I want your birthright. Give it to me or else I'm not going to give you food. And it's like, I could see myself being in that situation, just being like, I need food. I'll give you whatever you need.
I need to remember that. It's like, I want something you have. Here's a Hawaiian pizza. So anyways, it happens, right? And so the deception is found out, and Esau, Jacob's brother, is furious.
Oh, he's livid.
And he's quite the proficient hunter, so he has them killing skills.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and he vows to kill his brother Jacob. And so Jacob takes off.
He flees.
Right? He is trying to save his life, so he is out of there.
Yeah.
And so he spent some time with his mother's brother. So his uncle,
right? As you would prefer.
Yeah, if that's a term that you prefer. So yeah, he's there. He's there for a number of years. Grows his family, his wealth, and then God calls him back to where he was from.
Yes.
Right. And then this is all part of the covenant that was made with Jacob's grandfather Abraham, you know, to inherit the land that, you know, he had run away from. And so he's got to go back and kind of like face everything that he has done, right? And on the way back, you know, there's some issues, but the day before he's going to meet his brother, who Jacob is sure still wants to kill him.
Yeah, well, the last thing he saw of him was like, you know, being told, "I'm going to kill you."
They weren't corresponding this whole time. They weren't sending emails to each other, right?
Imagine if they did. Ooh, so much easier.
Yeah, that could have solved a lot of problems. Yeah. But the night before he's supposed to meet up with his brother, Jacob wrestles with God, right?
Like physically,
which is a crazy part of the story, but it happens, right? And even throughout that fight, Jacob, you know, something happened like to his body, like his hip gets locked, and he's, you know, he looks different after this fight, and he even gets a different name after this wrestle with God, right? And so his name gets changed from Jacob to Israel. But when he finally meets up with his brother, what happens?
Well, that's the crazy part, is like everything he expected to happen was flipped. He made preparations. He was telling his like people traveling with him, like, hey, my brother's gonna probably try and kill me, be prepared for this. But instead of anything bad happening, they run to each other. Esau embraces Jacob, huge bro hug, which was so surprising given what was expected. But like it was such a good, clean, unexpected ending to the story.
Yeah. And so what we see in this story is a Jacob who acted and behaved one way, you know, went away for a number of years and came back to this place and was a different person. Yeah. And he was changed by his relationship with God, right? His and I think we mentioned this before, his name literally meant deceiver, and he had done that. And he comes back and he is begging for forgiveness, and is accepted and brought home, and now is acting out of this relationship with God that he is carrying on, right? And now tasked with carrying on, right? So, and that is a story, or you know, when we look at Jacob's story and what happened in his life, you know, this is the same thing that we're called to as well.
Yeah. When you look at Jacob's story, there's so much we could go into. There's so many elements of his life and what that means for us as Christians. But I think one of the big elements is that transformation journey. We see who Jacob was at the beginning. We see the way he acted and the way that he deceived his family. But we look at where he ends up. And that idea of transformation and growing and just allowing yourself to change is something that, like you said, is we're called to do. You look through Paul's letters, and it's filled with these discussions of how when you're in Christ, you're a new creation. We're being told that we want to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. Like those are verses in Romans and 2 Corinthians.
Yeah, let's take a look at that verse in Romans here.
Romans 12.
So Romans 12, verse 1. It says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer up your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Do not be conformed any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." So we have this this commandment to be transformed, right? And that's what a relationship with God does, right? It's, there's this deficit in our humanity. Like we're not living up to everything that we were created to be, right? And everything that Christ does, and everything that a relationship with him brings us, allows us to transform and become the people that we were always meant to be when God created us, right? And that's that transformation.
And if you've listened to other podcast episodes or have listened to some sermons, it's likely that you've heard about this discussion beforehand. This we become new when we come through Christ. And that's a pretty common discussion. It's a huge one, really important. But I think one thing that often isn't discussed when it connects to it, and that's kind of what we want to talk about today, is in this transformation, the importance of letting yourself grow from your past mistakes and not getting stuck in the past, not getting stuck in those original people, but allowing yourself to grow. And I think that's just a key element of this.
Yeah, because like in order to move on from past mistakes, past situations, the person that you were, you need to leave that behind, right? And so often we can get locked into our past, right? Whether that is abuse or so things that had occurred to you or upon you, right? Or the things that you may have done yourself, right? You sort of, I think oftentimes we call that regret, right? And really kind of like the key to moving on, whether it's something that did happen to you or that you did that was, that you're holding on to, right? Is that you really need to forgive yourself in those moments, right?
Well, we think about it, God forgives you. Like you look at the work that Christ did on the cross, like the absolute sacrifice that God did so that we could have a relationship with him. Through that work, God no longer holds us to the consequences of pre-Jesus. And if God is willing to forgive us of all of our sins, I think that it's important for us to be able to forgive ourselves. I know that for me, and I know for a lot of people, it's very easy just to kind of let yourself just be defined by what you've done. And it's very easy to live in those mistakes and those regrets and those like, well, why did I do this? I'm terrible. Like, why do I deserve to become something new? Why do I deserve any, like, it's very easy to make yourself into this huge villain and make yourself into someone that doesn't deserve that grace. But if God is able to give you that grace, I think it's important for yourself to give yourself that grace too.
Yeah. And I mean, you're not defined by your past, right? Especially when it comes to the transformation that God brings to your life, right? Like last night we were looking at the book of First John, right? And you get to chapter 3 and it says like how much love has like how great is the love that God has lavished on us that we should be called children of God, right? And that is what we are, right? So whatever you were before that, and Paul would define that that life before God as enemies of God. If you look at the beginning of Colossians, like you were enemies with God in your mind, right? And then now that transformation, like to go from enemy to child of God, right? So so you're not stuck in your past. You're not defined by your past. God, when you come to a saving relationship with God, like by believing in him and hoping in him, you're not that enemy anymore, right? And so you are a child of God. And so God sees the future that you can step into, right? And he has that. He's holding that for you, right? If you look at Jeremiah, it says, I know the plans I have for you to prosper you, to give you a hope, right? And it's just like that putting in the past that enmity with God and like joining God in his family is a future that God wants you to step into.
And I think like you can look and see examples of this in scripture. There are so many people in the Bible that have these transformation stories of who they were in the past. You look at Jacob's story. You look at the story of Peter, how he denied Christ and then he became one of the solid pillars of the church. You look at Paul. He wasn't originally Paul. He was a Saul beforehand, persecuting Christians.
I love how like Saul became Paul, right? It wasn't like Saul became like Bartimaeus or something like that, right? Like
change one letter,
it's like
flip it around.
Just flipped a letter. Like I don't know, maybe Saul was like a rapper too. He's like, oh man, like I'm changing my name from Saul to Paul. You know.
Oh my goodness. You're showing your age again. But like, you look at those people and they had some rough pasts.
Well, I mean, like Paul, I think might be one of the starkest ones because he killed Christians. He hated Christians and then became one of the greatest one of them, right? And this is sort of like evidence of Jesus's work, right? Like these transformations in people's lives and who they were. Like Paul was a killer
Yeah.
in the past, and then he became someone who showed so much outrageous love and grace towards people, right? So I think that proves who Jesus is in these transformation moments.
And those transformations, those changes, these people didn't just forget about them and like, oh, well, that was never me. That became their story. That they weren't defined by it. They weren't living in the past, but they know who they were, and that became their testimony. That became a major reason why what they said had so much more value, because they were changed.
Yeah.
Paul was a Saul, and if he wasn't a Saul, like, I think he still would have done amazing things for the kingdom.
Yeah.
But I think that his witness would be a little bit lessened, because you have this personal story of, I was on this complete other side of this fence.
Yeah.
And now I'm here. And I think the same principle can be applied in this transformation, is don't be defined by your past, don't live in it, but recognize it. That's your testimony. That's what God's done in your life, and that's huge.
Yeah, and your testimony is noticing the change in your life, like how you were, and then who you become in that transformation, right? And there's a couple of verses that kind of like stick out to me that kind of bring that recognition to the forefront, right? And so Ephesians 4 verses 22 says, you were taught with regard to your former way of life, so like the past, right? Put off your old self, leave your past behind, right? Like when you were an enemy of God, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, and be made new in the attitude of your minds, right? So this like this renewing, this transformation, and put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness, right? So there's you look at that verse, and it's like, it's kind of like standing in the middle and saying like you need to like forget it, be informed by your past, but don't let it define you, right?
Exactly.
Like as you take on all the goodness that God has for you, right? And then if you flip over to Colossians 3 verse 12, it says, and we're gonna get some characteristics here, but therefore as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other, and forgive whatever grievances you may have against one another. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them together in perfect unity. And so there's this idea of like stepping into the future and putting the past behind you, like who you were in the past behind you, right? And even if you look like a few verses before that instruction from Paul talks about in terms of like putting to death like who you were in the past, right? So and that gets like symbolized in baptism too. So if you're thinking about baptism, come talk to us, something like that. So
super cool.
But like make note of the change in your story too.
Yeah. So we've been talking a bit about just some principles to apply to it, but I think that's also important to just kind of see what this looks like practically. So today we have a special guest coming to join us. Many of you probably know him. He's one of our youth leaders here. Michael Wilbur has stopped by.
Yeah, he's here today in the podcast.
Yeah. So he just wants to share a little bit about what this practically looks like and what this transformation is. So take it away, Michael.
Yeah, thanks you guys for having me on your episode of the podcast for this week. So I guess when it comes to the whole theme of transformation, I can broadly define what God's done in my life as either being, I guess, either active or passive. So when I say the word active, I mean that God has sometimes sat me down and told me in very real, blunt terms that I need to make some sort of a course correction, or on the other hand, if I maybe identified a part of my life that needs some fine tuning, I've given it over to God and asked him to do some work in my heart. So to boil that down, really in either of those scenarios, there was like a recognition within me of a very specific behavior or attitude, usually driven like by an event or a conversation or something like that, that ended up being followed by, I guess, some sort of an action plan to change things up for next time. So as an example, the Saturday night camp retreat effect, right? Where you have this moment of reflection and you have this like deep thought and this deep prayer emerges, and you become, a specific part of you becomes new from that, and then you move along. And these can be very important events in one's life. And I think that those have definitely, there's been specific things I've learned a lot about humility through that, because that's something I've really had to work on. And that's, yeah, so the active part is very important. These were hard changes, I would say, but they were necessary. You're a little bit vulnerable because your flaws are exposed, but I think this is kind of the great unifying factor that God uses, because God can work with us individually to, I guess, prune these specific branches. So we're not talking about pruning the overall bush. We're talking about one specific branch that he kind of says, you got to get rid of that, right? So just to use a metaphor, I guess. So, and I guess the other way that God has kind of worked is sort of in the background. So that's why I use the term passive. And so to kind of define that, I have to say that, like, I'm not a perfect person, but I've had a long enough of time to really seek out God for extended periods of time in my life. And, when you originally commit to these kinds of things, it's kind of hard to see what God's doing in your life right at the moment you start, right? But it's kind of more over time. You realize that you're more resilient, you're more strong, you're more responsive to the calls that God is making on your life. And I think that's given me perspective on just the sheer amount of power that exists in just letting God work slowly in the background. And so I guess, to give you a metaphor, it's kind of like doing a hike up a mountain trail. So we're not talking about scaling the side of a mountain with your two bare hands. We're talking about like walking up a trail. And for a lot of that, you're in the woods. You're going up, you're going down, you're going left, right, back left again, right? And you don't really know the kind of progress you're making. You kind of trust that the trail's going to take you there. But then you get these moments as you go along where you get to look out and see just the amount of progress you made. And you're like, wow, like I have actually done quite a bit for myself in that time just by the diligent effort. And yeah, like it kind of goes to show that a Christ-like life is not necessarily the path of least resistance. If you're looking for complacency, that's not where to find it, right? God is going to call you to do things, and he may ask you to step up boldly, but a lot of times it's just daily seeking him out, right? I think that's sort of the most important part. And so to kind of pull it all together, I would say that the act of allowing God in your life on a consistent basis is probably more important. And here's why: because when you're actively, or when you're working with him on an active basis, right? So you're making these momentary changes, I feel like sometimes it's limited to your own understanding in a way, right? So it comes out of some knowledge of yourself, and that's great. But we've also been told to not lean on our on our own understanding, because it's weak, right? So these are important events, but I think God really reveals himself to us in those times that we allow him to silently work in the background, right? Because that's where he reveals his true identity. And I think that's, in a lot of ways, when we learn components of ourselves that we didn't know that existed, right? And that's where God really fulfills us, is he gets behind us and inserts parts of our identity that we didn't know were possible, right? And so what does that look like? That is being in the Word, praying, being part of a church, mentoring others, being mentored, right? Just like your regular spiritual practices. And they don't necessarily amount to like earth-shattering things on a day-to-day basis, but you're going to see over the course of time, there's this like gradual, measurable, huge impact that occurs. And I think that that's why it's important to just, like, you have a daily spiritual practice. And we're not all perfect, but I think that is the single most important component of, I guess, seeking out radical transformation in your life, is just to continually yearn for God's presence over the course of a long period of time, and just becoming that beacon of light for others.
All right, thanks, Michael, for that insight. I think that has a lot to speak to this idea of transformation, right? I love how he brought us through sort of like this like progression of transformation.
And I liked how he was showing us that this transformation happens in different ways. It could be an active way, it could be a passive way. I think it was a great point. Thank you.
Yeah, sort of like the active is like very deliberate, where you know, I think it will be stark, and then sort of like I really liked his analogy of sort of like going on this mountain trail and kind of look back and see where you've come, right? And so sometimes it'll look like that as you sort of like you know, slowly and daily kind of like connect with God, and you'll see that transformation happen, right? So yeah, you know, start looking for ways that you can be transformed in your life. Maybe there's some things that you and God need to work out together, but remember that God is pulling you forward into his future, and that is going to be the best for your life.
So that's it for us today. Be sure to check out our other podcast episodes. We have a few other playlists set up if you ever want to check out some of the stuff we've been talking about. Be sure just to like down below. Do the classic YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. But honestly, if you like what you're hearing, and if you just want to hear more, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And we post every 2 weeks, as long as we're able to. So for now, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you guys.
Bye. You have more to work with, you know.
Wish I had less of you to work with.
You wish you had more of me to work with, because your day would be so much better if there was more of me.
What are we talking about today? Putting people in your past that bother you?
I don't want to be smoked.
I'm not gonna smite you.
What's the past tense of smite?
I think it's smoten.
Is it smoten?
I think it's
Yosh.
Yeah.
What if I talked in that voice for like the entire podcast?
Hello,
I'm here.
Well, we would like probably lose all of like the 32 subscribers that we
Or we would gain so many more.